They came without warning, without invitation, and without apology. Humanity didn't arrive in the galaxy with polished ships or diplomatic envoys. They crashed through the veil of interstellar civilization like a stone dropped into still water, ripples spreading far beyond what anyone expected. The first contact wasn't peaceful. It wasn't even planned. A damaged human vessel limped out of a wormhole anomaly near the outer colonies of the Zarnathi Dominion, trailing fire and radiation. Sensors picked it up as an unknown object, small, crude, barely holding together. The Dominion fleet moved in to investigate. What happened next became the first recorded encounter between humanity and an established alien power. The Zarnathi sent a standard hail, expecting either surrender or identification. Instead, the humans fired back, not with overwhelming force, not with precision weapons or sophisticated targeting systems, but with raw desperation and sheer unpredictability. Their ship was outgunned, outnumbered, and running on half-functioning systems, yet they managed to disable one of the Dominion's patrol cruisers before vanishing into the asteroid belt. The incident was dismissed at first, an anomaly, a fluke, but then more reports started coming in. Human ships appearing where they weren't supposed to be. Survivors from wrecked vessels taking over alien outposts with nothing but scavenged tools and sheer willpower. Entire colonies caught off guard by these newcomers who fought not according to any known tactical doctrine, but by instinct, improvisation, and a complete disregard for the rules of engagement. There was no grand strategy behind their arrival, no coordinated expansion effort. Humanity had stumbled upon the stars the same way they had discovered fire, agriculture, and spaceflight, through trial, error, and an unrelenting refusal to accept defeat. Their technology was primitive compared to the sleek, efficient machines of the galactic powers. Their ships were patched together from salvaged parts, their weapons outdated by centuries, their communication systems barely capable of transmitting across solar distances. And yet they survived. More than that, they thrived. Humanity did not follow the expected trajectory of a newly spacefaring species. They didn't build embassies, didn't send emissaries, didn't bother with formal introductions. When they showed up, it was often in the middle of a war zone or a collapsing colony or a forgotten outpost left to rot. They didn't ask permission. They didn't wait to be invited. They simply took whatever they needed, adapted to whatever environment they found themselves in, and kept moving forward. It baffled the established civilizations. The Phyrexian Accord, which had governed interspecies relations for millennia, struggled to categorize them. Were they a rogue faction? A lost colony? A failed experiment? There were no records of humans in any known database. No genetic matches. No linguistic similarities. They spoke in strange, clipped phrases, used gestures that meant nothing to other species, and seemed completely unfazed by threats that would have sent entire fleets retreating. Some believed this was arrogance. Others saw it as ignorance. Few understood that it was neither. Humans simply did not operate under the same assumptions as every other intelligent species in the galaxy. They did not value hierarchy the same way. They did not adhere to rigid codes of honor. They barged into situations where subtlety was expected, spoke when silence was demanded, and fought when retreat would have been logical. And they never stopped learning. Every encounter left analysts scrambling to understand what had gone wrong. Why did humans seem immune to psychological warfare? Why did they keep fighting long after logic dictated they should surrender? Why did they form alliances with enemies one day and turn on allies the next? The answer was simple. Humans were not bound by the same constraints as other species. They were adaptable in ways no one had anticipated. Where others relied on tradition, humans embraced change. Where others followed doctrine, humans improvised. Where others sought order, humans thrived in chaos. One of the most infamous early encounters involved a human scouting team stranded on a hostile moon. Outnumbered 50-1 by local raiders, the team had no chance of survival. Yet within 48 hours, they had turned the tide. They repurposed old mining equipment into makeshift defenses, negotiated with rival factions using nothing but hand-drawn maps and exaggerated promises, and ultimately led a counterattack that drove the raiders away. Not because they were stronger, but because they were unpredictable. That unpredictability became their greatest weapon. Galactic militaries trained for decades to anticipate enemy movements. to calculate probabilities, to plan for every possible outcome. But humans defied those calculations. They made decisions based on gut instinct, emotional responses, and sometimes outright defiance of logic. To a strategist, this was madness. To a human, it was just another Tuesday. As word spread, fear began to take root among the established powers. Some governments debated whether to isolate Earth entirely, while others sought to study and control this new variable. But containment proved difficult. Humans did not wait to be invited into conflicts. They inserted themselves wherever they pleased, altering the course of wars, treaties, and political landscapes. Whether they were seen as saviors, opportunists, or existential threats, one truth became undeniable. Humanity was rewriting the rules of interstellar politics, and no one knew how to stop them. But stopping them wasn't the real question. The real question was, what would they do next? No one could say for sure, because unlike every other species in the galaxy, humans didn't follow a single path. They didn't march toward a unified destiny. They didn't build empires the way others did. They were not conquerors in traditional sense, nor were they diplomats bound by rigid protocol. They were something entirely new, an unstoppable force of adaptation and reinvention, and they had only just begun. Their presence disrupted more than just diplomatic norms. It shattered the foundations of interstellar warfare. Established empires had long relied on predictable battle strategies, precise fleet formations, and calculated engagements. But humans did not fight like anyone else. They disregarded conventional tactics, favoring improvisation over doctrine. When confronted with superior firepower, they responded with ingenuity. When outmaneuvered, they turned retreat into ambush. Every engagement left analysts scrambling to understand what had gone wrong, because nothing about human behavior followed known patterns. Yet, despite the initial shock and resistance from established interstellar powers, humanity's influence continued to grow at an unprecedented rate. What had started as chaotic disruptions soon evolved into strategic advantages that no empire could afford to ignore. Governments that once dismissed humans as reckless upstarts began to recognize the potential benefits of working with them. Some sought alliances, eager to harness the unpredictable nature of human ingenuity in warfare and diplomacy. Others attempted to integrate human operatives into their own structures, hoping to mold their unruly tendencies into something more predictable. But the results were never quite what anyone expected. The universe had met many species throughout its long history. Some brought wisdom, some brought destruction, some brought peace. But none had ever brought chaos wrapped in brilliance, wrapped in stubbornness, wrapped in an unshakable belief that they could win. Even when all logic said otherwise. Humans didn't just show up late, bloody, and uninvited. They showed up and changed everything. And the galaxy would never be the same again. They didn't fight like anyone else. That much was clear from the first real battle they were thrown into. No, not thrown into, walked into, boots on the ground and eyes wide open, like they had chosen to be there. The Virexians called it a massacre. The humans called it Tuesday. It started with a border skirmish between two minor factions, the Orci hegemony and the Lutheri dominion, a routine engagement by galactic standards. Both sides had deployed standard strike forces, automated drones, precision artillery, shielded infantry. It was supposed to be over in hours. Then the humans showed up. No one knew how they got there. Their dropship came out of nowhere. No IFF signal, no diplomatic clearance. Just a battered old transport painted in mismatched colors, landing right in the middle of the battlefield like it belonged there. At first, both sides thought it was a mistake, a lost scouting team maybe, or a desperate attempt at evacuation. But then the ramp dropped and the humans poured out. What followed wasn't a battle. It was an ambush wrapped in confusion. The humans didn't take cover. They didn't form ranks. They just ran forward, yelling, firing wildly, and somehow managing to hit exactly what needed to be hit. Within minutes, they had disabled a command node, destroyed a power relay, and taken control of a forward outpost that neither side had been able to claim for weeks. The Orci tried to surround them. The humans responded by splitting into smaller groups and scattering. Some took to the trees. Others climbed onto rooftops. One squad even hijacked a maintenance drone, and used it to fly behind enemy lines. By the time the dust settled, the humans hadn't just disrupted the battle, they had ended it. No one won. Both factions pulled back, stunned by what had happened. And the humans, they stayed behind, set up camp in the ruins, and started trading with the local population. Within days, they had turned a war zone into a marketplace. That was the moment the galaxy realized something terrifying. These humans didn't just survive chaos, they created it, and they thrived in it. Military analysts scrambled to understand what had gone wrong, or right, depending on who you asked. Standard tactics failed against them. Predictive models couldn't anticipate their movements. Psychological warfare had no effect. They weren't afraid of death. They weren't impressed by superior firepower. And worst of all, they learned too fast. Every encounter became a lesson. Every defeat became a strategy. If a human unit was wiped out, the next one would adapt. If a weapon failed, the next one would be modified. If a plan collapsed, the next one would be rewritten on the spot. They treated war like a puzzle, not a contest of strength. One of the most infamous examples came during the siege of Thalzir. A human marine detachment found itself pinned down inside a ruined fortress, surrounded by overwhelming numbers. According to every known model, they should have surrendered. Instead, they did something no one expected. They surrendered. The enemy commander accepted their surrender, believing he had finally broken them. He ordered his troops to secure the prisoners, lower their weapons, and prepare for transport. That's when the humans struck. They had spent the last hour rigging explosives throughout the compound. As soon as the enemy lowered their guard, the entire fortress exploded. The blast killed hundreds, including the commander himself. Survivors later described it as the most brilliant act of betrayal in modern warfare. But it wasn't just about tactics. It was about alliances. Humans didn't follow the same rules as other species. They didn't care about ancient grudges or territorial disputes. They formed partnerships based on necessity, mutual benefit, or sometimes just personal trust. Entire factions that had been at war for centuries found themselves facing unexpected challenges when human mercenaries joined one side, tipping the balance in ways no one had foreseen. Some governments tried to contain them. They issued travel bans, restricted trade, and monitored human activity across multiple systems. But containment proved impossible. Humans didn't wait to be invited into conflicts. They inserted themselves wherever they pleased, altering the course of wars, treaties, and political landscapes. Whether they were seen as saviors, opportunists, or existential threats, one truth became undeniable. Humanity was rewriting the rules of interstellar politics, and no one knew how to stop them. And yet, despite all this, the greatest fear wasn't their unpredictability. It was their potential. Because if they could do this with outdated weapons, damaged ships, and no formal training, what would happen when they gained access to better technology? Some empires tried to offer them upgrades, hoping to integrate them into existing structures. Others refused, fearing that giving humans more power would only make them more dangerous. But the results were always the same. The humans took what was given, modified it beyond recognition, and used it in ways no one had anticipated. A prime example was the incident on Darnus Prime. A human engineer was given access to a prototype energy core developed by the Zalari Union. Within days, he had reverse engineered it, stripped out unnecessary components, and created a portable version small enough to fit in a backpack. When questioned about the modifications, he simply shrugged and said, "I figure out how to make it work without blowing myself up. Isn't that what you wanted?" The Zalari scientists were stunned, not because of the modification itself, but because the human had done it without any prior knowledge of their technology. He had studied it, taken apart, and rebuilt it using nothing but instinct and trial and error. It was reckless, irresponsible, and utterly brilliant. That was the thing about humans. They didn't need to understand something completely before they used it. They just needed to make it work. And once they did, they never stopped improving it. As word of their capabilities spread, fear began to take root among the established powers. Some governments debated whether to isolate Earth entirely, while others sought to study and control this new variable. But containment proved difficult. Humans did not wait to be invited into conflicts. They inserted themselves wherever they pleased, altering the course of wars, treaties, and political landscapes. Whether they were seen as saviors, opportunists, or existential threats, one truth became undeniable. Humanity was rewriting the rules of interstellar politics, and no one knew how to stop them. Because unlike every other species in the galaxy, humans didn't follow a single path. They didn't march toward a unified destiny. They didn't build empires the way others did. They were not conquerors in the traditional sense, nor were they diplomats bound by rigid protocol. They were something entirely new, an unstoppable force of adaptation and reinvention. And they had only just begun. They didn't just fight, they built. At first, the galaxy thought that was all they were good for, chaos and combat. But as humans inserted themselves into more systems, more conflicts, more economies, something else started to emerge. Something unexpected. Where others followed rigid trade routes and bureaucratic agreements, humans carved their own paths. They didn't wait for permission. They didn't ask for approval. They showed up, saw an opportunity, and took it. It started with small things. Trading salvage tech between warring factions, brokering deals where no one else dared to negotiate, setting up independent outposts in places long abandoned. No one knew how they did it. One day a system was locked down by tariffs and embargoes. The next, human-run markets had sprung up in the shadows, exchanging goods faster than any sanctioned exchange could manage. The Virexian succession crisis became the turning point. For centuries, the empire had been ruled by a strict hereditary monarchy. When internal strife threatened to fracture the entire civilization, every major power positioned itself to influence the outcome. Then, without warning, a group of humans arrived, not as soldiers, not as diplomats, but as deal makers. They didn't align with any single contender. Instead, they brokered a compromise that no one had anticipated. By leveraging information gathered through unconventional means, some legal, some less so, they orchestrated a deal that allowed all major claimants to retain power in some form. It was messy, unorthodox, and deeply unsettling to the Virexians, but it worked. The crisis ended without bloodshed, and for the first time in history, the Empire adopted a council-based ruling system. Many viewed this as a betrayal of tradition. Others saw it for what it was, a new kind of governance, one that prioritized results over rigid structure. The Virexians weren't alone in realizing this. Across multiple systems, governments began noticing a pattern. Wherever humans went, things changed. Not always predictably, not always peacefully, but always permanently. Trade was the next frontier. Human traders bypassed traditional routes, establishing direct exchanges between civilizations that had never interacted before. They introduced barter systems where currency had failed, created hybrid technologies by repurposing discarded alien components, and built entire black markets that operated beyond the reach of imperial oversight. While some governments condemned these activities as illegal or destabilizing, others quietly benefited from them, recognizing the economic advantages of human adaptability. One of the most infamous examples came from the Drenari Expanse, a region known for restrictive trade laws and monopolistic control by the Phyrexian Merchant Guild. For decades, the guild had maintained absolute dominance over interstellar commerce in the sector. Then, a handful of human traders arrived with nothing but old freighters and a willingness to take risks. Within months, they had disrupted the entire market. They bought surplus materials at a fraction of the cost, traded directly with independent colonies, and even smuggled goods past checkpoints using modified cargo holds. What made them truly dangerous wasn't just their efficiency, it was their creativity. They didn't follow rules. They found loopholes, exploited weaknesses, and turned scarcity into opportunity. The Phyrexians responded with sanctions, embargoes, and military blockades. None of it worked. Humans adapted. They rerouted shipments through uncharted space lanes, formed temporary alliances with outlaw factions, and even developed encrypted trading networks that couldn't be traced. Eventually, the guild had no choice but to acknowledge them, not as enemies, not as rivals, but as inevitabilities. Even within scientific and technological fields, humanity's impact was undeniable. Their tendency to experiment without regard for conventional wisdom led to breakthroughs that defied logic. Alien scientists scoffed at human engineering principles, only to find themselves adopting modified versions of those same designs after witnessing their effectiveness. The infamous MacGyver principle, as it came to be known, involved assembling functional solutions from seemingly unrelated components, a practice that had once been considered absurd but was now studied in academic institutions across multiple star systems. One of the most controversial cases involved a human engineer who managed to stabilize a failing warp core using nothing but scavenged parts and intuition. The ship in question, an aging cruiser on the verge of decommissioning, was scheduled for destruction due to an irreparable energy leak. But the engineer, working alone and with minimal resources, identified the issue, recalibrated the reactor manually, and kept the vessel operational for another decade. When questioned about his methods, he simply shrugged and said, "I figured out how to make it work without blowing myself up. Isn't that what you wanted?" That was the thing about humans. They didn't need to understand something completely before they used it. They just needed to make it work. And once they did, they never stopped improving it. Culturally, the shift was slower but just as profound. At first, many species resisted human influence, seeing it as an erosion of tradition. But over time, subtle changes began to appear. Human slang became common in everyday speech. Storytelling traditions evolved to include human-style narratives, fast-paced, emotionally driven, unpredictable. Even humor shifted, with alien comedians incorporating human-style improvisation and absurdity into their routines. Some civilizations embraced this transformation, integrating human customs into their own societies. Others resisted, attempting to preserve their traditions against the tide of change. But even among the staunchest critics, traces of human influence were impossible to erase. The very fabric of interstellar society had been altered, and there was no turning back. Yet, despite their growing acceptance, there remained an underlying unease. No one could fully predict how humans would act next, and that uncertainty bred both admiration and fear. Some species embraced them as valuable partners, while others still viewed them as dangerous variables that could not be trusted. Yet, regardless of perspective, one truth remained clear. Humanity had become an unavoidable force in the galaxy, reshaping its future in ways no one could have foreseen. And they had only just begun. They didn't come to conquer. They came to exist loud, messy, and unapologetically themselves. Humanity's presence in the galaxy was no longer a novelty. It was a defining force that shaped the course of interstellar civilization. Their impact extended beyond warfare and diplomacy, touching every aspect of life across the stars. Empires that had once dismissed them as reckless intruders now found themselves adapting to human unpredictability, incorporating their unconventional strategies into military doctrines, rethinking economic policies to accommodate their disruptive trade networks, and even modifying cultural norms to account for their influence. What had begun as an anomaly had become an inevitability. Some civilizations chose to embrace this transformation, integrating human customs into their own societies. On certain planets, human slang became common in everyday speech, and human storytelling traditions influenced literature and entertainment. Others resisted, attempting to preserve their traditions against the tide of change. But even among the staunchest critics, traces of human influence were impossible to erase. The very fabric of interstellar society had been altered, and there was no turning back. Yet, despite their growing acceptance, humans remained enigmatic. They did not seek conquest in the traditional sense, nor did they establish a centralized government to represent their interests. Instead, they thrived on individualism, constantly shifting allegiances, and an ever-evolving patchwork of independent actors shaping the galaxy in unpredictable ways. This lack of cohesion frustrated many who wished to negotiate with them, but also ensured that humanity could never be easily controlled or contained. They were not conquerors in the classical sense, nor were they diplomats bound by rigid protocol. They were something entirely new, an unstoppable force of adaptation and reinvention. One of the most telling signs of this shift was how alien governments began treating human settlements. At first, these outposts were seen as rogue colonies, unauthorized, dangerous, and potentially destabilizing. But over time, something strange happened. The settlements thrived. not because of superior technology or strategic location, but because of sheer resilience. Where others built cities according to strict planning and long-term projections, humans built wherever they wanted, however they wanted. They patched together infrastructure from salvaged parts, repurposed abandoned structures, and turned wastelands into bustling hubs of commerce and culture. The infamous New Haven station became a symbol of this phenomenon. Originally a derelict mining facility orbiting a dead moon, it was claimed by a group of human settlers with no formal authorization. Within a decade, it had grown into one of the largest independent trade centers in the sector. No empire controlled it. No laws governed it, at least not officially. Yet, traders from dozens of species flocked to its markets, drawn by the promise of opportunity and anonymity, and the kind of freedom only humans seemed to offer. Governments tried to regulate it. Some sent envoys. Others deployed fleets. All failed. The station adapted. It absorbed new cultures, integrated alien technologies, and evolved into something entirely unique, a hybrid civilization born not from conquest or colonization, but from chaos and necessity. And it wasn't alone. Across the galaxy, similar settlements emerged, each with its own rules, its own identity, and its own brand of order or lack thereof. This decentralized growth worried some. If humanity couldn't be stopped, what would they become? Would they eventually form a unified empire? Or would they remain scattered, a million different factions operating under 1,000 different rules? No one could say for sure. But what was clear was that humanity was no longer just another species among many. They were a phenomenon, a force that defied categorization, prediction, or control. And perhaps that was their greatest strength. Unlike the great empires of old, which expanded through conquest and consolidation, humans expanded through presence. They didn't need to claim territory, to influence it. They simply had to be there, and things changed. Entire political systems had been reshaped by a single human diplomat's offhand remark. Entire wars had ended because a human mercenary decided to switch sides at the last minute. Entire economies had been disrupted by a handful of traders willing to take risks no one else would consider. No other species had ever operated like this. No other civilization had ever left such a mark without building walls or raising flags. Humans didn't need monuments to prove their existence. They didn't need treaties to assert their power. They just needed to show up, do things differently, and walk away before anyone could figure out how. Looking ahead, the future of the galaxy remained uncertain. Would humanity continue to operate as wild cards, reshaping the universe according to their own chaotic logic? Or would they eventually coalesce into something more structured, forming a true interstellar power that could rival the great empires of old? Some feared that if humans ever united under a single banner, the balance of power would shift irrevocably. Others believed that was impossible, that unity went against everything humans stood for. And maybe they were right. Maybe the idea of a unified human empire was as absurd as expecting water to flow uphill. But then again, humans had done the impossible before. They had survived against all odds. They had fought when they should have surrendered. They had built where others saw only ruins. And above all, they had adapted, not just to survive, but to thrive. No one knew what the next century would bring. Would humans become rulers? Revolutionaries? Something no one had yet imagined? Perhaps the answer was simple. They would become whatever they needed to be, whenever they needed to be it. Because that was the thing about humans. They didn't follow the rules. They made their own. And now, the entire galaxy was playing by them. Looking up at the stars, many species wondered the same question. What happens next? But no one dared ask it out loud, because the answer might be terrifying, or brilliant, or both. And somehow, deep down, everyone already knew the truth. Humanity had rewritten the rules of existence among the stars, and the universe would never be the same again.